Previously on I.C.T Clinic.
Hello there. Welcome to I.C.T Clinic. Welcome back to I.C.T Clinic. In this episode, we are going to discuss the constituents of a computer. When you hear the word constituent, what comes to mind? There are several meanings to a constituent, but the one meaning that we are going to use is a component part of something or a combination of things that make up a particular object. So if you link this meaning to a computer, it means that we are talking about the features or components of a computer. So the constituents of a computer is actually referring to the features or components of that computer. The computer has two fundamental constituents, which is the computer hardware and the computer software. For the sake of this episode, we are going to consider the computer hardware, and in subsequent episodes, we are going to consider the computer software. What is the computer hardware? It is the collection of physical parts or elements that make up a computer system. Any part of the computer that you can touch is hardware. The physical part. Any part of the computer that you can touch is hardware. We have quite a few examples of computer hardware. Some of those examples include visual display unit, mouse, keyboard, speaker, hard disk, motherboard, system unit, and many more. These are some of the examples of computer hardware. The computer hardware is also classified into two categories. The first one is the system unit, and the second one is the peripherals. What do you understand by system unit? The system unit is the enclosure or box that houses the main components of a computer. Sometimes we can also call it the computer case, we can call it the computer housing, we can also call it the chassis. Yes, computer case, computer housing, or the chassis. The main thing that you can find in the system unit is the motherboard. The motherboard is the device that connects all physical components of the computer together. There is nothing on the computer that does not have a link to the motherboard. But we have to note something. Some people usually refer to the system unit as the central processing unit. This mistake is often made by computer vendors. Imagine you going to a computer shop where they sell computers, and the vendor is asking you to come and buy a CPU. But when he's asking you to buy a CPU, you notice that it's a box that is asking you to buy. The box that these vendors sell is not the CPU, it is the system unit. So we have to notice or take note that the system unit is not the same as the CPU. We have two types of system units. We have the tower casing system unit and we have the desktop casing system unit. What is the tower casing system unit? This system unit is designed to stand upright or vertically. It is usually placed under the desk. As these two pictures indicate, you notice that these system units are standing upright. This is a typical example of a tower system unit. Also, we have the desktop system unit. Each system unit is designed to be placed flat or horizontally on a desk or table. No wonder it is called a desktop. But there is also a mistake some people make. A desktop computer is different from a computer desktop. When you talk about a desktop computer, you are talking about a type of system unit that is placed flat on a desk. But when you are talking about computer desktop, you are talking about the first screen that you see after the computer completes its booting. You can usually identify a computer desktop with the wallpaper on the screen of the computer. When you get to the stage of the wallpaper on your computer, you are at the computer desktop. These two pictures indicate the front and rear view of the system unit. We can see some items that we find on the system unit. These two pictures also represent how the view of a desktop system unit looks like. These devices that we are mentioning or we are looking at, such as the DVD-ROM, the floppy disk drive, these are also some of the features that we see on a desktop system unit. So the rear view also shows the power port, the keyboard slot, the mouse slot, parallel printer, and other things. These are also found on the desktop system unit. Now, what is the difference between the system unit and the CPU? You see, as we explained earlier, when you talk about the system unit, it is the enclosure or box that houses the physical components of a computer. We also call it the computer case, computer housing, or chassis. And the main component you can find in the system unit is the motherboard. But when you talk about the CPU, we also know it as the central processing unit, and it is a small metallic chip on the computer's motherboard. We also call the CPU the brain of the computer. Yes, the CPU is not the system unit. So anytime you go to the vendors and they are asking you to buy a CPU, but they are showing you a box, then you correct them that this is not a CPU, it is a system unit. We are going to see a video that is showing the system unit and the components inside it. So we wait for the video and enjoy what the video has to offer. This is the tower casing system unit. As you can see that it stands upright, and according to the picture that we have seen earlier, we are able to identify some of the features of the tower casing system unit. This is actually the disk drive. This place usually stands for the place where you put your floppy disk. Your flash drive is plugged in. This is the power button, and this is the light indicator. That's the front panel or front part of the tower casing system unit. As you can see that it stands upright. Then we also have the back where we can see the power supply where it is plugged, the space for the keyboard and mouse, other flash drives. Then this is where we plug our monitor, then the audio jack, the microphone jack. Now it's time for us to see the inside of this system unit. Let's see what we have inside the system unit.
Very good. Now, as we said earlier, that the system unit houses the main components of the computer. The main thing you can find inside the system unit is the motherboard. And this green structure or this green device you are looking at is the motherboard. You see the processor fan, you see the power pack. This power pack is the one that regulates the power that goes to the motherboard so that high voltage does not spoil the motherboard. Then you see cables. These cables are the ones responsible for the transfer of information on the motherboard. Now let's see how the motherboard looks like. We are going to check a motherboard that we have already detached from the system unit. This is the motherboard. This motherboard comes with different features. The first one is the processor fan. The processor fan, that's the processor fan. This one is in charge of cooling the processor. As we said, the processor is also known as the CPU. Then we have the heat sink. The heat sink is the one that uh, takes all the heat that is produced by the processor, because the processor is a metallic object that generates a lot of heat. So the heat sink takes all the heat while the processor fan cools the heat sink. So this is the heat sink. Then we get to the processor. This is the processor. As we said, it is a small metallic chip. You see how it looks like? This is what we call the computer. This is actually the computer. It does all the processing on the computer. So this is the computer's processor. Let's use this opportunity to check some other things that we can find on the motherboard. Now, we have our RAM. This is RAM. This one is in charge of holding information temporarily on the computer. We have our connector cables. This is another RAM on the motherboard. This is our chip. These are PCI, peripheral component interconnect. It stands for attaching other devices that does not come with the motherboard. Let's say you want to add some other tools to your motherboard to work properly. This is the place you plug them to. Then we also have its own audio jacks and other ports. You plug your printer here. This is where you plug printer. Old printers, because modern printers, they make use of the USB, and this particular green port is the one that is in charge of audio, where you plug your sound. Here I have the CMOS battery. The CMOS battery is one that regulates the time of the computer. It ensures that the time of the computer is correct. So if you notice that your computer time is lagging, it means that the CMOS battery power has been exhausted. You need to change the CMOS battery. CMOS. Now, this particular green cable is responsible for modern hard drives or hard disks. This is used to plug hard disks to the computer. This particular one is used to plug old hard disks. You see the difference between them. So these are some of the things that we can find on the computer's motherboard.
Welcome back. As we saw in that video, we saw the internal structure of the system unit. We saw the motherboard and how other devices are connected to it. We also saw an open motherboard that has been removed from the system unit. We saw the CPU, the brain of the computer, and we could now see the difference between the system unit and the CPU. So next time we go to vendor shop or we hear some people talking about the system unit and calling it CPU, we now know the difference. The CPU is also known as the processor or the central processing unit, while the system unit is the box that houses the motherboard. Now we are moving to peripherals. Peripherals are devices that are connected externally to the computer in order to add extra functions to the computer. They are not compulsory devices on the computer because without peripherals, the computer can still perform its basic tasks. Examples of peripherals include gamepads, joystick, printer, scanners, light pen, speakers, projectors, microphones, and many more. Note, any device that you externally attach to the computer so that the capacities or capabilities of the computer can be enhanced, or in other words, that it makes the computer perform tasks that are not basic to the computer, is a peripheral device. For example, if you connect a microphone to your computer, an external microphone, it is a peripheral device because the computer is not designed to be using microphone as a compulsory device. If you want to talk to a large audience, you connect to a projector. That projector is a peripheral device because the computer can still work effectively without the projector. The same thing with scanner, light pen, and the likes. Yes, the peripheral devices are very, very important devices, but they don't hinder the functionalities of the computer if they are not available. Now, we have to note something. The keyboard is not a peripheral device. Although the keyboard is connected externally to the computer, but the keyboard performs basic input functions on the computer, so much that you cannot do anything on the computer if you don't have keyboard. So the computer needs the keyboard to perform basic functions. Imagine not connecting keyboard to your computer. How do you input data to the computer? As the next video will show that if a computer is not connected to, if the keyboard is not connected to the computer cannot function properly. Let's enjoy the video and thank you for watching this episode of Computer Hardware.
Now, this is a simple test to prove to us that the keyboard is a very essential part of the computer and it is not a peripheral device. We are going to remove the keyboard of this particular system and try to boot it, and we will see the information that the computer will give us as regards the keyboard. So the first thing I will do is I will remove the keyboard. I have detached the keyboard. Now that I've detached the keyboard, the next thing for me is to put on the computer here. Then, when the computer is powered, let's see if truly now the computer is booting. I want you to pay attention to one of the instructions that the computer will give. See, now it is saying keyboard failure. That's the first thing it detected. And the computer is telling us to strike F1 key to continue. But since the keyboard has failed, then if you strike any button, you will see that it is not working, which means that the keyboard is not a peripheral device. Although it is externally attached to the computer, it is a very, very important part of the computer.